Thank you for joining us for another podcast from the Commonwealth Club of California.
Greetings and welcome to today's meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California. I'm Patty James, co-chair of the Cub's Health and Medicine member-led forum and chair of this program. It's now my pleasure to introduce Sandra Khan, DDS, MSD, who is a graduate from the University of Mexico and the University of the Pacific. She has 25 years of clinical experience in orthodontics and is part of the craniofacial anomalies team at the University of California, San Francisco, and Stanford University. Paul Ehrlich, PhD, has been a household name since the publication of his 1968 bestseller, The Population Bomb. He is Bing Professor of Population Studies Emeritus and President of the Center for Conservation Biology at Stanford University. Dr. Ehrlich is a member of the National Academy of Sciences and a recipient of the Crawford Prize, the Blue Planet Prize, and numerous other international honors. He investigates a wide range of topics in population biology, ecology, evolution, human ecology, and environmental science.
Well, thank you for inviting us. We wrote this book called Jaws, and the subtitle says, The Story of a Hidden Epidemic. What is this epidemic? Everybody's the first question they ask. And it's, if we look around us, we will see that children don't look great these days. I took these photographs that I'm showing in an amusement park. And within 20 minutes, I took 200 photographs of children that were just hanging around in the park. And we can see that they all have their mouth open. But that's not really the problem. The problem is that their jaws are not growing properly. And we have a set of habits that are making the kids not breathe better, breathe correctly, or show the growth that they were supposed to have genetically. We have a lot of crowding. Everybody knows people that need braces or have braces. And we also have a lot of adults that are snoring and are having problems with their sleep at night. And the newest thing is we have babies that snore. And this is not healthy. Malocclusion is the problem with your teeth. It means the teeth don't fit properly, that the jaws are not aligned. But malocclusion is not just an aesthetic problem. It's actually a health issue. We know that if the jaws are not where they should be and the teeth are not matching, we are going to have problems with our body. We're not going to be able to have a healthy life because we're going to be dealing with a lot of stress. And we all know that sleeping is important. And if we're not sleeping well, we're going to be too stressed. And stress is going to take us to disease. This is my personal journey because as an orthodontist, I'm board certified by the American Board of Orthodontists, and I was working for 25 years with children and with adults and teenagers and getting them beautiful teeth, beautiful straight teeth. But then my son came along, and I had the job of treating my own kid, and I realized that there were no tools that I had to make him healthy. He was a mouth breather. He was starting to snore. He deals with asthma and allergies. And I had to go and search the world to try to help him. And that's how I fell into the newer techniques that are helping us grow our face forward. So this is my own journey as a parent and as a clinician that did not have the tools. So we decided to write this book to help parents and anybody that deals with children so that they can have the tools to help their children grow and become what they have to become genetically. Because what we're seeing in society is not these chinless kids with the mouth open, with sad, tired eyes or snoring, is not what these kids are meant to be. And with this brief introduction, I'm going to have Paul take it on, Dr. Ehrlich, and tell us a little bit about how we decided to collaborate together. Because in our fields, in medicine and health, we tend to be siloed. We are becoming more and more specialized in small little areas. And Dr. Ehrlich, Paul, is such an incredible person because he's really interested in anything that human predicament influences. He wants to help humanity. And this is one of the things that we can actually do something about. Human predicament has a lot of things that we cannot control. But, the way our teeth grow or our kids develop is something that we can have an influence on. And with that, let's have Paul tell us a little bit about our story.
Interesting question, obviously, is how the hell did Sandra and David and Ann and me get together? And the picture you see there really is the clue, because Sandra was close friends, with another Mexican scientist, Gerardo Ceballos, and they were working together on conservation in Mexico, and had an NGO called Rainforest to Reef, and were particularly interested in jaguar preservation. And the picture actually shows Sandra with a jaguar that she jumped on, wrestled to the ground, and is now attaching a radio tag to it. But it turns out Gerardo's a close friend of Anne's and mine. Gerardo and he's a professor at UNAM, the biggest university in the world, and a brilliant ecologist. And we've worked together for years. And about 20 years ago, he was spending time at Stanford and introduced us to Sandy and David. And we discovered a common interest in fermented grape juice. Some of you may have tried that. Helps a lot during the Trump era, let me tell you. So we started talking about these issues, and it was really an enormous embarrassment to me, because here is this huge problem all around us, actually more complex even than we show in the book. And I had totally ignored it, and my colleagues had totally ignored it. In other words, why in hell should virtually every kid now have a mouthful of metal dealing with crooked teeth? Because crooked teeth shouldn't be standard in an animal like Homo sapiens. It just doesn't make any sense. And what I discovered through her, she taught me, was this a problem in the growth of the jaw. Never thought about it until I got into it. I've now read about 500 papers in the medical and dental literature dealing with this. That will dissolve your mind right on its own, by the way, I can tell you. Some of you know about medical research. But here's a picture of a standard head. This is a kid that really has a well-developed jaw, a proper face, lots of forward growth, and so on. And it's just a picture, for those of you who can't see it, of a really good-looking kid with a proper face. And now I'm showing a picture of a skull of a hunter-gatherer. And if you see the skull of the hunter-gatherer, you'll notice that there's a beautiful arch of teeth. All 32 teeth are there. There's room for all 32 teeth. The jaw comes forward. It's exactly what we find when we look at the skulls of hunter-gatherers. In other words, the shrinkage of the human jaw is something that has gone on for the last few thousand years, since the agricultural revolution and then the industrial revolution, but particularly even more recently. There have been a lot of interesting studies doing things like excavating Scandinavian graveyards, getting skulls from 300 years ago, measuring the jaws, and finding, if you look at current Scandinavians, that the jaws actually have shrunk just in about 300 years, and significantly shrunk. This tells you immediately, some people will say, it's all genetic. If anybody tells you anything is all genetic, you know it's a person who knows nothing at all about modern genetics. And if somebody tells you that the human jaw has been shrinking for the last few hundred or even few thousand years caused by genetics, it means the same thing, because, of course, genetic change goes on in a generation time. So while you can raise fruit flies and change them genetically in 20 or 30 weeks, it takes 20 or 30 generations of strong selection to change anything in human beings. And of course, there's not the slightest sign of strong selection making human jaws smaller. If you think your friends reproduce better when they have small jaws than big jaws, then you got a different bunch of friends from the ones I have. So what has happened is we have brought our Stone Age genome essentially unchanged into a McDonald's world. And what are the many factors that have changed in the environment? And it's essentially all environmental change. What are the environmental changes that have led to the shrinkage of our jaws, to the crookedness of our teeth, to sleep apnea? I'm just curious, how many of you have sleep apnea? 90% is the way I calculate it. Anyway, there are things called CPAP machines to help you sleep through the night. We know, one of my colleagues, actually the colleague at Stanford, Robert Sapolsky, who wrote the introduction to this nonprofit book, by the way, no profits are going anywhere, is a specialist in stress. And there's a huge literature on how interrupting your sleep stresses you. And there's a huge literature on how stress leads to things like Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, cancer, ADHD, and even things like death on the highway and death in the hospital. In other words, it's a huge, huge problem for humanity, and yet we know what's causing it, and we're not doing much about it, I'm sad to say. For example, this is something that embarrasses Sandra. She has 2 kids. They're brilliant kids. They're gorgeous kids, actually. But when she was a working mother, when she was doing her clinical work, she breastfed the kids, except during the day when she was working. And so she pumped, and David supplied milk through a bottle, breast milk through a bottle. She understood, as we all do, hopefully, how extremely valuable breast milk is. And it turns out that she didn't recognize, and I didn't know, and most people don't know, that actually nursing exercises the jaw muscles in a way that drinking from a bottle doesn't. It's a lot of work for a kid to nurse, and that's very important. There's a weird thing that's happened in health systems. Somehow, this part of the face and the mouth and the tongue have been removed from medical care. You're told, one thing you're told if you read the health literature is keep exercising. Exercise all your striated muscles. Never do they say exercise your jaw muscles, exercise your tongue, keep your tongue in the right position, and so on. And yet there's massive evidence that if you want your jaw to develop properly, you have to exercise your jaw muscles, and you have to maintain a proper posture with your tongue. Gentle pressure from your tongue on the roof of the mouth, as we know from a lot of studies, result in proper, broad, forward jaw development. There's a picture of a kid struggling with nursing, and here's a picture of one of the problems. First, we don't nurse long enough in general. Obviously, some people do, some people don't. And if you can't do it, there are other things you can do. But now we don't wean to what hunter-gatherers weaned to. Hunter-gatherers weaned their kids to what they ate. They weaned them to things they could chew. Now we have a hideous thing called the baby food industry. And what that is making sure that the kid never gets a chance to chew on anything because it produces liquid foods and pap that don't require any chewing at all. Here's an example. On the left is a kid eating liquid broccoli. And everybody thinks, wow, they're getting the right nutrients. They're getting the right nutrients, but it would be like if you didn't let your kid ever walk, what would you expect of their leg development? There's some people who think one of our biggest mistakes was inventing all the utensils we eat with, that actually it'd be much better if we maybe just had knives, got a buffalo haunch, slice it off with a knife and chew on it. But if you try that in one of the downtown San Francisco restaurants, it's even probably worse than smoking. I mean, you'll be asked to leave. Anyway, we know this from a whole lot of studies, but one of the most interesting is one that neither Sandra and I would approve of now, but a whole series of studies done by a guy named Harvold, in which he did various things to rhesus monkeys. For example, he plugged their noses with plastic plugs, and he saw immediately when you plug the noses of a rhesus monkey with plastic plugs, its jaw development goes to hell. He did all sorts of interesting stuff, showing that just putting a little block of plastic on the tongue would affect the way the whole face and jaw developed. There are other animal studies, by the way, that show the same sort of thing. One of the ones that I had never heard of. I have now been into, believe it or not, horse dentistry. How many of you ever studied horse dentistry? How many of you ever owned a horse? I'm curious. Oh, well, a few. It turns out that if you feed a horse good horse chow, very nutritious, twice a day, you got problems with the horse's mouth. And they actually have a term called floating your horse. The reason is that normally a horse lives in a pasture and it chews on tough grasses 18 hours a day. If it chews for 20 minutes twice a day on horse chow, its teeth, its jaw development goes to hell. Its teeth get too big and grow too far. And it turns out, believe it or not, floating your horse is taking a big file and filing the horse's teeth down to make it give its jaw. And there are other similar experiments on animals. So this isn't far out stuff. This isn't rocket science. It's quite clear. And We also know for sure from human studies that there's no genetic component in this at all. For instance, one of the things we did, one of the big environmental changes that we did was moving indoors. What does moving indoors do for us? Well, one of the things it does is puts us in a situation where we concentrate allergens, and so that kids get allergies very early on, particularly if they're in daycare. Because as you all know, in daycare, the viruses are circulated around, and it turns out that most of our kids have stuffy noses for the first few years of their life. That's the equivalent of sticking the plastic plugs in the rhesus monkey's nostrils. It kills your proper jaw development. And there's some interesting cases. One, which is shown there, is a kid who around 6 years old was given a gerbil as a pet. Kid was deathly allergic to gerbils. His nose got stuffed, and there is the progress of what happened to his jaw just over the next year or two. No genetic, same genes. If you dissected him, you'd find exactly the same DNA and variants in it that you had over the years. No genetic change at all, but an interesting and common environmental change. And all the picture really shows is the jaw moving backward. When the jaw moves backward, guess what? The airway gets smaller. When the airway gets smaller and your jaw is smaller, there's not enough room in your jaw for your tongue, so the back of the tongue slips back into the airway. When you then lie down, it slips back further. Then when it slips back further, the first thing you start doing is snoring because the air going by vibrates the back of the tongue. If you keep it going long enough and you're old enough and you get more obese, then you get sleep apnea and you find yourself on a CPAP machine trying to prevent you from ending your breathing repeatedly during the middle of the night and stressing yourself out. So it's not just a matter of the appearance of the teeth and the appearance of the chin, it's the matter of the width of the, and if you get the book, you'll see in it lots of x-rays showing what happens to the airway in these circumstances. To show a little reinforcement of that, here's an interesting trio of a grandfather who was raised in a traditional situation in India, his son who moved into the industrialized world about halfway through his life, and then the grandson who was entirely in the industrialized world. And what you can see in the picture very clearly is a great chin and face on the grandfather, an intermediate state on the son, and the wreck of the grandson. And with that little bit of introduction, I return you to my boss and the person who got me into all of this and got me to read 500 papers in the dental literature from which I can never forgive her.
Well,
what do you do about it is what she's going to talk about.
yeah, the practical part. We all want to know there's a problem, but what can we do about it? And the most important thing that we can do as anybody that interacts with children or even, us as adults is learn to recognize the problem. Because the first step is to recognize what's going on. If we can't see it, then we can't really focus on what to do about it. And what we call reading the face is looking at children and knowing what signs we can pick up that are showing us that the problem is already happening. So when we read the face, we have to look at things like, if there's an open mouth, that's the easiest one for us to see. But also when a kid smiles, that's one of the tough ones. You see a lot of gum, even if you have baby teeth. You know that the jaws are starting to fall down. They fall down and back. They're not developing up and forward as they're supposed to in order to develop the nice big airway in the back of the throat. So we have a gummy smile, which is when you smile and you see a little bit of teeth and then you see some gum. Really, a smile should only show teeth. We have snoring. We've talked about snoring. Children should never snore. If a kid is snoring and is not overweight, because overweight could be a problem too. But snoring or any movement at night, if the covers are disheveled, that's a sign that something's not right with the way this kid airway is and the way the jaws are growing. So we have all that. But we also have the signs that we see as an epidemic now, like Paul said, ADHD and all these attention problems. These are really as a result of the kids not resting properly. They don't rest properly because they can't breathe properly, and this is why we see them moving a lot at night. And there's enough research, like Paul said, we've read a lot of papers, we've looked at the literature, and we know that there is a relationship between the kids that can't be still and the kids that are not sleeping well. If we see a young parent with a kid and the kid is having a tantrum, usually you say, oh, I'm sorry, they missed their nap today. So if you're not sleeping well, you're going to be hyper. We usually think it's the opposite, right? When you're an adult, you fall asleep if you're tired. But children tend to be very hyper when they're not rested well. So that's something that we need to look at early in life, because we can identify a lot of these problems early in life when the kids are only 2-3 years, even before that. The problem that we have with this epidemic is that it's a problem that can only be resolved with prevention. And you can only prevent something before it happens. Once it happens, it gets complicated. You can, mitigate the damages, but a lot of the misery that comes with this problem can only be addressed with prevention. So this is why we wrote this book, as Paul said, a nonprofit book, because we want to give information and we want to make it very practical for people to recognize this and start preventing it. The time where kids start getting their permanent teeth in, that's when the parents come in and they show me, I'm showing a photograph here of a palate, the roof of the mouth that's very narrow and the teeth don't fit. And this is a time where parents take their kids over and they pull their lip down and say, hey, Sandra, look at my kid's teeth. They're coming all in different directions. And it gets to be a little late to really be able to fix the problem at this time. The other time that, I hear people all the time is when the wisdom teeth are not coming in. And that's definitely too late. Once the wisdom teeth are scheduled to come in, then you end up having to pull them out. Even though there's a lot of times where these wisdom teeth are not being, they're being taken out and it's not necessary. So we have a lot of things to observe in our society. Kids falling asleep, not being well rested, falling asleep in weird positions. But also, we know that we grow when we sleep. And grandparents told us this, your kids need to sleep. We always grow when we sleep. And this is scientific because we know that there's growth hormone that is produced during the night hours. We have anywhere from 11 o'clock to 2 or 3 in the morning. That's when we produce the most growth hormone. And this is when the kids should be in the deeper stages of rest. So they should be in the stages of sleep that allow them to rest with this hormone that they produce. So this is the main issue. And the jaws not being large enough is going to be the result of them having their mouth open or whatever habit they develop, but then the mouth open and the growth is going to result in a narrow airway. So this is a photograph I put up just so that we see that the back of the throat is a tube where the air goes through. And if we think about it, we can all think about if we are given a fire hose to breathe, or if we're given a cocktail straw to breathe, it's going to be harder to breathe through a very narrow tube. So this is a very common sense thing. You don't need a doctor to tell you this. So if the jaws are forward, the tube in the back of the throat is much bigger. And if the teeth have a lot of room, if we have more teeth, if we have our 32 teeth, including the wisdom teeth, then the tongue has a lot of room to live in the front of the mouth. So it doesn't have to share space with the back of the throat. And this is what we need to learn to recognize, because we have children that look adorable. Evolutionary, biologically, we have to look beautiful, because when we're little, we need our community to help us raise the children, and it takes a lot of effort. So we tend to have children that all look beautiful. And this kid in the photograph that I'm showing is a kid that came over to my partner's practice, and we said, this girl is heading to trouble. We could see the gummy smile on her, and we could see a lot of signs that were not right in this child. But the parents looked at us and they said, you're crazy. My daughter just won the beauty contest in her, preschool class, and she's fantastic. And, there's no way we are going to address anything right now. And who are you to tell me that my daughter is not absolutely perfect? And then they brought the daughter a few years later to us, and she looked like this. So this was a problem that with educated eyes, you can prevent, and you need to go in and help these children, because they are, if you educate yourself and you learn, of course, you get our book and you look at photographs, you will learn what the symptoms are, and you will be able to help children, because children, those symptoms are yelling at you. If you see these kids in the playground with their mouth open, you are going to go crazy, because you'll see every child is like that, and it looks like the child is begging for help, and we are just ignoring these children and expecting the orthodontist to just come in and fix their teeth when their face is not in the right place. We as dentists, we learned what normal is. But normal is not common. It's different to be normal than to be common. We don't see normal anymore. We have this girl that also came to our practice, and her baby teeth were all lined up with a beautiful smile, and they had no space. But we noticed that she was tilting her chin up. And if there's any dentist listening to this or in this audience, we have been taught that there's the baby teeth should have space between them. We should be able to fit a coin in between every contact of baby teeth. And if they're not separated like that, the permanent teeth are not going to have room. And they're not going to have room because the jaws are not developing properly. So what we do is we help these kids, and we do some treatment. We show them how to deal with the habits that have caused the problem. We change their posture. We give them a little bit of expansion, very mild treatment early, but then we train them how to have the right posture, because malocclusion, or the problem with your teeth, is really a problem of posture, because the posture, hanging the mouth, not having the strength to have the tonicity in the muscles to hold our posture the way it's supposed to, is what causes the jaws to just fall down with gravity. So if we teach the kids how to hold their head properly, breathe through their nose, and we give them simple exercises, we will end up with really nicer faces. And this is what we do. We do expansion early with the baby teeth, and we make the jaws, or we develop the jaws to the size that they're supposed to be. And then we let the kids continue growing, as opposed to addressing the problem once it already has occurred. And we like to start early. As Paul was saying, breastfeeding is important. Breastfeeding is critical, the muscles and the way we do it. But not everybody can breastfeed. But we find the most important part of developing our jaws is the weaning period. It's giving kids things that challenge their muscles, that challenge the tongue. And there's a lot of research now. There's books already, and there's already a fantastic healthy trend where parents are giving kids real food, and they're letting them hold the food with their hands and experiment. And this is overall helps children, because it helps with the neurologic development of hand to mouth, and being able to develop their dexterity and a lot of things. And it also, in addition, helps them make healthier choices of wanting to have these foods that exercise their jaws, as opposed to choosing, highly processed foods with, macaroni and cheese or hamburgers, things that these children will choose if they are raised in very soft foods. And we have a program called GOPEX, which is Good Oral Posture Program, which is something that we train kids with so that they can develop better. And these programs are fantastic, because if we start them very early, you deal with the habits and you create new neurological patterns. There's research, it's quoted in our book, that we have a lot of research that shows that if you repeat something for 30 days in a certain way, you will develop the brain pattern to repeat it. So it's very, very interesting that we can actually train kids to do things while they're sleeping. And there's no other program that I know of where you can actually repeat something for 30 days and then it becomes habit, and then you change while you're sleeping. And as I said before, when we sleep is when we grow. So it's critical that kids have good sleep hygiene. And we know about the timings of sleep, and we know about the amounts of sleep, but we really need to make sure that the quality of sleep is there. The quality of sleep is not the same. We have a nose. In physiology and anatomy, we know about use it or lose it. If we don't use a part of our body, it's not going to develop. We have a nose. We're supposed to filter the air, warm up the air, moisturize the air that goes into our lungs. So when our mouth is open, we are bypassing the nose. The nose also produces nitric oxide, which is a chemical that protects us. And that only happens if we breathe through our nose. If we breathe through our mouth, we're bypassing that very, very important process in our physiology. If, for example, we don't chew our food, if we're eating foods that are processed and we're not doing a lot of hard chewing, then we're not going to squeeze our glands and get the saliva in the mouth. And saliva has enzymes like ptyalin, which is where digestion starts. So digestion should start in the mouth. So in the GOPICS program, we teach kids to do that old-fashioned stuff. This is why we call the program Good Oral Posture, because it's what our grandparents used to teach, or our great-grandparents taught our grandparents, which is to chew your food thoroughly with mouth closed, breathe through your nose, chew 30 times until the food is liquid, and then rest and swallow without making all kinds of funny faces.
You are listening to the Commonwealth Club of California. Listen to thousands of our podcasts on iTunes or Google Play. And when you're in the Bay Area, please join us live for one of our 450 programs each year. You can find us online at commonwealthclub.org. And now, back to our program.
Kids today, they're eating on the run, they're making everything quick, and there is a trend to make things fast in our society. So kids are really speed up. And with our programs, we tend to slow them down so they can grow better. And one of the things that we do is we have them, just pause. And kids have a hard time doing nothing. They always complain. There's nothing to do. I'm bored. But there is a value of doing nothing. And we got to teach them to do nothing during the day so that they actually start doing nothing at night too. And when you do nothing, that's when you're going to grow better. You're going to optimize every cell in your body. We have a picture here, and we can see this gorgeous girl that has been doing our program for just about 1 year. And it's quite obvious that she's growing completely different than she would have gone without this program. And this program is fantastic because we first work with this book with awareness, but then we have the program where they can actually do the exercises and change the way they present themselves to the world. That's what I wish for children, is for them to present to the world in a way where they are proud and they're able, as opposed to sitting back. They hold their head out high and their jaws nicely closed. And if they sleep well, then they're going to be able to have this anatomy or the development, the architecture in their mouth so that they can have a healthy life. And this really influences much more than just the way the teeth look. And I am going to make a few comments about older kids, because that's the biggest concern we have. Most people have already missed the boat. And so we want to talk a little bit about what we can do with older kids. The return on investment is a lot harder with older kids. And when I talk about investment, I say time and effort. For an older kid to really be able to revert some of the damages is difficult, but it is possible. Some kids that are very, very committed, they can learn some of the activities and some of the tools that we have to help them grow better. So this is a girl I'm showing. She's 13 years old. She's not my patient, but she's Dr. Mew's patient, and she's really came a long way. But she's been working 10 whole years with this program. She started at 13, and she's in university, and she's still working with this program. So it's taken her a long time, but if anybody can see this picture, it's made this girl extremely beautiful. And one of the things that we have to remember is that beauty and health go hand in hand. And if we look better, we're also going to be healthier. If we really look at what we were meant to be, when we look back at hunter-gatherers and pre-industrialized people, we have the jaws that we are meant to have genetically in order to be healthy and to have less stress. So this is something that can be done, but it's extremely difficult. So we got to really go in and try to do things early. And finally, for anybody that's past this, we want to really talk about cures. We don't want to talk about Band-Aids or just patching up a problem, which is, I'm an orthodontist. I still think it's the most fabulous profession that there is. I've been an orthodontist for 25 years. And I think orthodontists are starting to utilize the tools of what we call forwardonics, which is to bring things forward. And we want to cure. We don't want to make teeth straight. There's enough research out there that tells us that teeth don't stay straight. They get crowded again. So if you just take a symptom and you address it and you patch it up and you don't change whatever caused it, you can never have the problem go away. It's going to come back. So we have too much research showing that the crowding comes back and retainers have to be worn, and even wearing retainers, the problem comes back. So when we talk about cures, we have to talk for adults and for older children. We have to consider surgery. We have to consider, moving the jaws where they're supposed to be, because people are living with misery. And if anybody has sleep apnea or knows somebody that has sleep apnea, we have moved into a time where we're only dealing with symptoms, and things are getting worse, and they're going to keep getting worse unless we address the problem and we cure it. And my daughter had surgery last summer, and I thought it was a fantastic thing for her, because she now has the jaws that she should have had we addressed her symptoms early, had we knew what we know now, and we could have helped her, but we didn't get there on time. So we could do a million things to mitigate the problem, but the only real way to deal with the problem and to give her the airway that she needs to have is to go in and put physically the jaws where they belong. And immediately this will look a lot better, but it's also going to be healthy, and she's not going to have to deal with misery when she's in her middle ages or 40s, 50s. She's not going to have problems with snoring. So we also have to work with, surgeons, physicians. In this country, we don't have a big culture of prevention, and we don't have a culture of cure. We tend to manage symptoms and deal with things with medication and other things. So we need to really focus on cures. And I know this sounds scary, but there's a lot of well-prepared physicians, orthodontists that understand this and can help people, guide them into this process so that we can actually find cures. So now I'm going to have Paul continue and talk a little bit about the other problems that this epidemic is taking us to.
Let me add, by the way, that I just came back from Australia, where my closest colleague has a wife whose life has been turned into misery by she cannot use a CPAP machine for various reasons, and basically half of every day is destroyed by the set of problems that Sandra has been discussing. I'll say one other thing before I go to the last little segment, and that is, if you get the book, read the part about an artist who studied American Indians and realized what was going on with their development of jaws as opposed to the Europeans. And he wrote a book in 1859 or 60 called Shut Your Mouth and Save Your Life. The Native Americans called us not just white men and so on, but black faces, because our mouths were always open. We do not pay enough attention to our oral posture, but bringing our Stone Age genomes into the McDonald's era has, as I've slowly begun to realize, and we just published a paper on this, got many effects. There's a mismatch between our genes and our environment. The genes that evolved gradually and normally over human history have fit us into our environment have now had this extraordinarily sudden change with agriculture and industrialization, which is basically instantaneously, evolutionarily, has led to a whole series of mismatches One of the most interesting and I think important to those of you who have young kids is that there's now a building epidemic of myopia, nearsightedness. And there's a big literature on this now. And nobody's absolutely sure why we have this particular epidemic. There are two real possibilities. One is something that we've changed totally and affects our sleep and all the stresses there, is that we got artificial lighting. You know, in the old days, we all went to sleep when the sun went down and we woke up in the morning. Well, one of the ways, for example, we know that kids didn't snore is, from our point of view, speculation, but we think it's very solid speculation. If you were an Australopithecine a million years ago or so, and you were living on the African veldt, and you were hunted by leopards, and we know that's what did hunt our ancestors, among other things. If you're hunted by leopards and sleeping outside, snoring is not a great strategy for protection. Leopards don't tend to flee from and but now, of course, besides changing the light regime that eyes are subjected to, you may have noticed that some kids now look at a thing called a cell phone and develop a posture, as this illustration shows, that's all slumped over, but also they don't focus their eyes at a distance very much. And one of the things we know from other work is that you have to learn to see by experience. For example, there have been fairly numerous people who were blind at birth and then had sight restored, usually in the early teens or so. And the results there are quite fascinating. First of all, if you were blind at birth and you get your sight restored, say when you're 15, you can see a yellow background and you can see black figures against a yellow background, but you can't differentiate a cross from a circle. You have to learn to see that sort of thing. As a matter of fact, some people who have had sight restored have asked to be made blind again. And that was really mysterious to me till I thought about it hard. And I thought, you know, when you're blind, you have developed all kinds of tactile and hearing senses and so on, and orient to the world that way. Suddenly, you're sighted, you're getting all this new information you can't interpret. It's like, imagine if suddenly a device was implanted in your head so that you could receive all the radio and Wi-Fi and so on information around you. You'd go nuts. You'd have all of a sudden all this stuff you can't deal with, and you say, God, take it the hell out. That's sort of the way people sometimes feel when they have their sight restored. So one of the things bringing our Stone Age genomes into the McDonald's world is we're changing our vision and we're getting more and more kids with myopia. Another example is that we have, and this is, by the way, the world's expert on this is in the audience. I won't point to him, but you might get to talk to him afterwards. We've toxified the entire world. We now know, thanks to Dr. Pete Myers, primarily, other people too, in endocrinology, that the basic idea of toxicology, that the dose makes the poison, is wrong. The dose makes the poison is what you learned in high school. That is, if you eat a pound of salt, you'll be poisoned and die. And the idea is the more of something, the more likely it is to be toxic. But what Dr. Myers and others have shown is that some things are much more poisonous in very small quantities. And we have created a world in which we are saturated with hormone-mimicking chemicals as well as other toxins, and we're not paying any real attention to it. And this picture shows you one of the most dangerous toxic things that we all are influenced by, and that is the receipt. Receipts are coated with bisphenol A, a very nasty substance which may be contributing to the drop in sperm count in human beings. But we are living, basically, if you analyze people's blood today, it's like looking at the shelf list of an organic chemistry lab. We don't know for sure what the effects are, but everybody who knows anything about it is scared by those effects, because here's a brand new environment that we just weren't adjusted to. We had some forms of adjustment because there are poisons that plants use to try and keep us from eating them. But there's this whole new array of dangerous chemicals we know have biological effects, and we don't know what the long-term effects are going to be. It's another example, just like the Jaws thing, of a global problem where at least you can have some influence on what happens to your kids. You can have your kids chew right. You can have your kids not, for instance, as some do now, roll their joints with receipt paper, like I showed you there. Some people are rolling their joints with receipt paper, so they're increasing the nasty chemicals that they're being exposed to. And there are many others, but a final really dramatic example is you may have noticed that we haven't given up treating other people badly or even killing them. The rumor has it, for example, that a totally depraved person or two now have complete control over nuclear weapons. In other words, a depraved person was a hunter-gatherer. The worst he could possibly do, or she could possibly do, is, take a big rock and knock a couple other people on the head. Now, and by the way, just a couple hundred years ago, a bunch of people decided that it was okay if people carried muskets around if they were part of a militia. The muskets, that tall, if you're really good, you can probably load one in about a minute and a half. But if it takes you a minute and a half to load your musket, it's very difficult to go into a bar and shoot 12 or 15 people with it, because for some reason they'll leave while you're reloading, right? So we got ourselves in a new technical environment, and the picture, of course, that I'm going to show last is the part of the environment that threatens not just our children, but all of us. That is, you got to be absolutely nuts to bring a Stone Age genome, which still has all these crazy urges to have something that looks like a dead mammal on your head or something like that. Do that sort of thing, and give the people who do that, the true nuts, the ability to wipe out humanity. And on that cheery note, Sandra and I will be delighted to answer questions and even talk politics. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to end by saying that we've given this problem a scientific name, craniofacial dystrophy, one of my colleagues, and we want to urge an army of demanding parents that are asking for three things: early treatment for the children, refuse extractions from your orthodontist, and ask for non-retraction so that nothing's pushed back, and third, that prevention is better than fixing. So those are the three things that we want society to start demanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We were going to collect the questionnaires, and I was just going to read them. But since you've answered everybody's question, we only have one. I'm going to let you read it yourself, partly because I can't read your handwriting.
My question is, I would like you to comment on separating food and liquid. If processed baby food reduces chewing, washing your food down with liquids is the same. I never have liquid in my mouth when food is in my mouth. Horace Fletcher studied chewing in San Francisco about 100 years ago, and he determined, like you said, it takes 30 strokes to properly chew food, and I am always the last person finished at any meal, any place.
Well, I'll take that real quickly. You're right. We've done our homework. We're very familiar with that. But, you're not supposed to eat with water because you dilute the gastric juices. There's so many things, physiologically that shouldn't be. And the recommendations are to either drink something an hour before or 2 hours after you've eaten. And this thing about washing your food down is definitely one of our bad habits. Thank you.
And here's a question. Are there ethnic differences in jaw growth? Fascinating question. Or geographical?
The answer is, I keep wanting to reach for a microphone, but I don't need. The answer is sure. There are ethnic differences, geographic differences in shapes of heads and all sorts of things. But everybody as far as we know, as far as I know, I should say, because obviously, what do I know? There's always room for, in a normal jaw, there's room for 32 teeth. We're being sued by Lamborghini and Lexus and Mercedes because, as the government has pointed out, about 67% of the jaw of the so-called wisdom tooth extractions are unnecessary. So, of course, if you cut the extractions by the amount that they should be cut, a lot of oral surgeons would be out of business, and who would buy the Lamborghinis and so on and so forth. But as far as we know, all human beings develop with a set of 32 teeth, and wisdom tooth is just the last molar that gets crowded out. There's they should call it the stupidity tooth, because the tooth that reflects the stupidity of the way we feed and raise our kids.
Can you speak more about the example of the 13-year-old girl who worked hard to improve over 10 years? What did she do?
I don't know how much time we have, but mainly she went through a program called orthodontics, and we've modified that program. We call it orthodontics. But the main thing is we create the architecture for the kids. We give them the width that they're supposed to be using appliances, and then we have a program here. This is only 30 seconds of an example of my daughter doing the exercises, where you see the posture. She just has to count twice a day. And she has to breathe through her nose. You can see that she's practicing counting and speaking and making pauses. And this is the way we teach kids to make pauses so they can breathe through their nose and rewire their brain. And they have to do it twice a day. So it's not a lot of work, but it's a long-term work. So this girl did a lot of postural work to learn to hold her mouth closed, because she had her mouth closed, her mouth open for 13 years of her life. And so she had to undo it. I usually say you take you miss your exit and you go 2 miles in the wrong direction. You have to come back 2 miles to be where you were at. And this is what happens if she's 13 years old and she's already had bad habits for all those years, then she has to work that amount of years to get back to where she should be. And that's only if you're young enough where you can still undo some of the damage. But that's part of what we do is the GoPix program is to rewire those good habits in chewing and breathing.
Hi. This is a personal question. I'm 35. I had braces as a teenager, buck teeth, a space between my teeth. I was recently told that I have an overbite and a tongue thrust, and the dentist told me that my jaw is too small for my tongue. What hope is there for me? Do I do surgery? Do I train the way that I speak? With who?
Well, that's the difficult part, because we're just starting to learn about this problem. We do have people that are in faculties and universities, and this is one of the things that is most difficult, bringing light to this problem, is that the universities are not teaching these techniques. So you need to find somebody that can help you. There's a lot of things you can do. Obviously, I can't diagnose on the spot right here, but if you go find somebody that's an airway-centric orthodontist, they will help you. The fact that you don't have room for your tongue is clear, because if you have any crowding, you were probably retracted with braces, so they rob some of the space for your tongue. So you can recuperate it. There's a lot of practitioners that do work on. There's a very good one in LA, Bill Hang. I'm not trying to sell anyone on this, but he treats almost adults exclusively, and he does fantastic job getting them to have room for all their teeth. So if you develop more room with an orthodontic appliance that's geared to give your tongue more space, and then you deal with your lisp or your tongue thrust or whatever problem you have with some exercises, it will improve the quality of your life. And sometimes you do have to think of surgery, but you have to be careful and you have to be very critical and do your homework and learn what techniques are conducive to more space and which are not.
Okay.
Let me just say something here that's more general, and that is, if you have financial constraints, you can often do better going overseas for treatment and for surgical treatment. I think it's all right for me to say that Ariella went to Spain, where they have an absolutely world-class surgeon who will do the job for, what, 1/3 or 1/4 of the cost in the U.S., and you can be in Spain, where they have a decent government.
It's not just the cost. It's the fact that they're doing it on a regular basis. They're doing it every day. They're doing 3 or 4 a day, as opposed to in the U.S., where a medical system is not geared for cures. So there's good surgeons, but they're doing so few that they can't get efficient and fast, and some other places have really, really good care. But again, we can't recommend anything. You got to do your own homework. But there's the first step, like I said at the beginning, is to recognize that there's a problem.
Okay, 2 more questions, and then we'll move into the other room. My child, 8 years old, just started to see an orthodontist. Did I say that right? We were told that there will be much more space, perhaps even need implants to fill gaps. At the same time, wisdom teeth may still need to be pulled.
Well, again, I can't diagnose from a question, but if it's going through orthotropic techniques, there shouldn't be a need for implants in an 8-year-old. And if 8 is a tricky age, I like to get kids when they're 5 or 6, and then absolutely they will have wisdom teeth, space for the wisdom teeth. Once you get to 8, you start getting to the limit, and it really depends on how committed the family is, the kid is, and how good and experienced the clinician is. But at 8, you can have a good chance of not needing any further surgery because you're still young enough.
Okay, last question. In dealing with prevention in early childhood, how do you achieve compliance in children's exercises?
Well, you make it fun, and you have to be disciplined. We are failing our children because we're not giving them a lot of discipline. We're making everything too soft for them. Everything has to be protective, and they need to be out in the world, and they need to be experiencing toughness. And parents need to have the permission and the tools to help them by being disciplined. You can make it fun for the little ones, but once they start getting a little bit older, you need to request that they sit at the table, that they take their time, that they chew their food, that they don't play with electronics. But like everything, we have to do it as a society, because if you try on your own, you're going to fail, because you're going to be the weird one that's teaching these old, we call it good old posture techniques. You're teaching them these things that your grandparents were teaching, and they were annoying. So now we're better because we can do anything we want. Parents need to be empowered to teach their kids the proper table manners and the proper way to eat and to speak. And we just have to empower each other as a society.
Oh, what a wonderful way to end the program. So, yeah, definitely. So our thanks to your wonderful comments here today, Dr. Ehrlich, Dr. Kahn. We also thank our audiences here as well as those listening to the recording. And now this meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, commemorating its 114th year of enlightened discussion, is adjourned.